So, in this tutorial series, we're going to discuss setting up a complex model, such as a vehicle with many parts, and how to rig that complex model in a hierarchical style. We're going to begin with this student template. You can go ahead and download that. You can find that at this location. Thank you to Mr. Estarzo for providing this complex model. The first thing that we're going to do is begin to group our shapes into groups so that we can rig those in a fashion where the body, the rigid objects are going to be moving together as needed. So all of the vehicle parts that are moving together, we're going to go ahead and select all of those parts and group them. That's Control G on your keyboard, or you can go ahead and go to the Edit drop-down, Group. Make sure that you are using a naming convention that is appropriate and readable. Naming conventions are very important when it comes to hierarchical rigging. You'll notice in my outliner that this vehicle has been grouped. All of the parts, including the working parts on the interior for this particular demo, are being grouped together and will move together as the car body. Oh, you can see that there are a lot of parts here. This model was chosen not just because it's a very high poly model, but it's also has some innate issues that we can learn from as we work our way through the modeling and the grouping of these particular assets. Alright, so all of the body parts together, all of the wheel parts together, each individual wheel, tire, the undercarriage that belongs to that wheel, all of those parts are then also grouped together. You'll see that if I go ahead to the underside of this vehicle, all of the spokes, the wheels, some of them are still left in bits and pieces. For this demo, we're going to just group them all together. Naming convention that I'm using is car _ R for right, rear, L for left, and then wheel. And I've got 2 for the back, and I have 2, of course, for the front. And the other part of this setup that I need you to see is where that pivot point is located for that group. So as you're pulling together all of the parts for your group, go ahead and group those together, put the naming convention on that particular wheel, and then we need to make sure that the pivot point is in the proper place. Normally the pivot point will be down in the center of the world at a 0, 0, 0 location, and so what we're going to do is just make sure that that pivot point is snapped to the center of the wheel on the inside of that wheel. So the steering mechanism is buried in this location. It's important to make sure that you're familiar with where those the joint locations are for rotation. So in order to get your pivot point where you need it to be, you can go ahead and hold your D key down, D. You can see that the gizmo changes. This allows you to move the pivot point without disrupting the location of the object. Now, if you want to snap to that particular location, center of the wheel, you can hold down the V key, V as in Victor, and go ahead and snap to a pivot point, or excuse me, a location on the tire. V, or if you want to snap to the a curve, if you've got curves on your vehicle. There are no curves on this one if you're using this one for your rigging. Excuse me, and then you'll release that D key once you've snapped to the location so that the change is solidified. Now if you move that to group, you can see that it moves from the pivot point, and it'll rotate from that pivot point origin as well. So again, while you are setting up your vehicle, this initial phase is all about organization of your body parts and your wheel parts, your moving parts. In this case, it's going to be your tires and wheels. So if I click on one of these objects, use my up arrow, I'll go to the group node. You can see in my outliner that the group node is a container for all of my vehicle parts. And the same is true for my wheels. Up arrow to get to that group node. The group node has a naming convention and a pivot point in the proper location. I'm holding my shift key down and clicking on the little minus in order to close that up in your outliner so that you can see the full organization here. The front wheel, notice the pivot point, the front right, naming convention, group, node, the pivot point, notice the location, the right wheel. Now this one is not going to be steering, it's not going to be rotating around a joint, so the pivot point is located in the center. Same is true for the other rear wheel. And then the body of the vehicle, the pivot point is I set that normally at the center of the vehicle, but also notice that you've got an overall group node for the body group node and the 4 group nodes managing the wheel parts. That I simply named as car, and that pivot point has a different location. Now, this location is in the center of gravity. So if I were to balance this car, it would, in fact, with this heavy engine, be balanced from this particular pivot point. Now, again, knowing the actual configuration of your real life vehicle will help you to get those locations on your pivot point correct. It's important for applying physics solutions inside your game engine that the center of gravity be located in the proper location, just to give it that lifelike effect, like it's heavier in the front than the back. All right. Once you have the organization of your vehicle, then we will go ahead to the next section, create the handles that we're going to be using for our rigging, and then begin to build our hierarchical rig.